She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Tonight, the U.S. region experiencing a rapid surge in the fastest-growing strain of COVID. Then,
Google Maps and AI may mean less red lights in your future, and it may also help the planet.
and the West Coast braces for a powerful storm on the CBS Evening News.
I do like Trump, but he needs to learn how to be quiet on a few things.
I've been thinking about DeSantis for most of the campaign season, but I know that he is falling in the polls.
It's going to take a little bit of time for folks to feel what the Bidenomics has been able to do.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. In less than 2 weeks, voters in Iowa will choose their preferred Republican candidate for president. 2024 hopefuls are now on the campaign trail. They're looking to cut into former President Donald Trump's commanding lead in the polls. And joining us today, Finn Gomez and Aaron Navarro. Finn is CBS News' political director. Aaron is a CBS News campaign reporter. Great to have you both with us. Aaron, you're out there on the campaign trail. It looks like the state capitol is right behind you. The governor there has endorsed Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, but that hasn't given him the lead in any recent poll, but he's still feeling pretty confident on the ground. What gives his campaign that sort of confidence at this time?
Well, I think his campaign is trying to outwork the competition, per se. They think that voters on January 15 will reward the full Grassley they did, kind of the grassroots operation they've grown, making sure that they have someone to speak on their behalf at every precinct on January 15th. They think that that work will help them overperform on caucus night. Now, DeSantis, when you ask him, he says he was going to win the Iowa caucus, but from talking to his allies, they just want a close second, at least within the 10 points. But one thing the DeSantis campaign is aware of is Nikki Haley, who's kind of right on his tail here in Iowa and leading him in New Hampshire.
A close second. Finn, it's hard to see what a close second would do for anybody at this point. What does that mean? Within 10 points, is that a close second? Everyone seems to want to manage expectations a few weeks out from Iowa. But you talk to the Trump campaign all the time, Finn. You talk to Trump's allies on the ground in Iowa. It seems like Trump is now not taking Iowa for granted. In every recent speech, he's telling people, don't stay home. Don't think you have to caucus. You can't just watch this on TV, he said in one recent speech. Do they feel a little bit of heat in the Trump orbit about Iowa, that DeSantis, even if he has stumbled, the Florida governor has this ground operation, as Aaron has outlined? Do they feel that some of that evangelical support that has long been there for Trump might be soft? What's your read behind the scenes? Not publicly, but what are you hearing really behind the scenes from the Trump people?
I think they have a recollection to 2016 and that cycle, Bob. And specifically, they didn't want to get out mathed. They didn't want to get out strategized, if you will. You know, so even before really where we are now, just 13 days away from the Iowa caucuses, the first nominating contest, right? They were preparing themselves by having more of a structural attempt to galvanize their supporters. That's why the commit to caucus events that they're holding is so important to them, they say, because they remember 2016. They remember when they were outperformed, right? And as you yourself have reported, there's been these upsets before in Iowa. We remember 2008, we remember 2012, 2016. There's a wide margin this time around, though, Bob. And if he gets, as Aaron mentioned, that 10-point difference, and the Trump people say that they think it's at least 15 points or 12.5 points that he has to do as good. If he does 15 points or better, 12 points or better,
DeSantis is out.
That's enough of momentum to go to New Hampshire. And
well, I think there's something complicated there, Aaron, because you brought up, Aaron, Nikki Haley and how she's maybe coming up behind DeSantis in Iowa. And Finn just outlined what the Trump campaign's doing. You heard all of that. And that's really intriguing reporting. But at the same time, if Nikki Haley starts to gain ground in Iowa with independents who come to caucus, that could really give her a jump going into New Hampshire in a way it wouldn't even help Trump necessarily or help Ron DeSantis. What are you seeing on the ground in Iowa from Nikki Haley and her allies. What's the story there? Because we always hear Nikki Haley, New Hampshire, Nikki Haley, New Hampshire. But what about Nikki Haley, Iowa?
That's right. Well, it's notable that Nikki Haley's super PAC and her campaign are going to be the top spenders in terms of TV advertising here in Iowa. And just from, quick chats with her team, they're confident about the crowd size that they're getting. They're confident about, her town halls getting more recognition, local media, especially as she tries to build the kind of momentum she's seeing among the polls maybe in New Hampshire and do that here and cut in Ron DeSantis' lead. But on the ground from covering DeSantis events, what I am hearing that is interesting is that voters that were usually considering DeSantis or Haley earlier in the summer, in the fall. They just want a Trump alternative. Now the crowd at DeSantis events tends to be more undecided Trump-DeSantis voters. And when I ask about Nikki Haley, they tend to say that, we like her, but we just don't think she can be president. And that's kind of these voters just tuning into this race, just tuning in when all these ads from the DeSantis and Haley camps and super PACs are going at each other. That's kind of what they know going into these events. And that's kind of permeated in terms of the support that voters at DeSantis events are telling me.
And there are undecided voters out there in Iowa and every one of these early nominating states. Let's listen to one of these undecided voters that we've picked up here at CBS News in recent conversations.
The reason why I don't have who I'm going to caucus for is because I want to listen to them all.
I've been thinking about DeSantis for most of the campaign season, but I know that he is falling in the polls. His campaign hasn't been as impressive as it was hyped up to be.
I'd probably do Vivek Ramaswamy because I just feel like he relates to me more because he's younger than the other candidates.
So there is a Vivek Ramaswamy voter there. It's so good to hear, Aaron. I know you've been doing a lot of work on the ground talking to voters, and we have so many other campaign reporters out on the campaign trail for CBS. It's really important to hear from those voters, and we love to have that reporting as part of this broadcast. But, Finn, for Trump, it's all about grievance in terms of maintaining that support, even if some may be drifting to the siren song of another candidate. Trump's grievances over the political establishment, the legal establishment, at least how he perceives it, is so much of the fuel behind his campaign. And there was just news a few minutes ago that the Trump team has now appealed the Maine ballot disqualification. And so Trump was kicked off the ballot in Maine by the Secretary of State there. Now the Trump team is appealing that decision in Maine. Not a surprising move, but news expected that they're going to keep pushing. Is that push, whether it's in the civil fraud trial in New York against Jack Smith, the special counsel on January 6th, or up in Maine on ballot access, how does all of those legal challenges figure into the Trump strategy and how they're trying to motivate voters maybe to come out because of that grievance about all of the things we've discussed?
I think it falls into what their expectations and their strategy, right? I mean, they know about the Maine decision. Obviously, the former president has gone after the Maine Secretary of State Bellows, who decided that, right? I mean, a Democrat, but. Essentially, they are prepared for this. They know that in previous incidents that we've seen, Bob, as you recall, after the FBI search in Mar-a-Lago, after each indictment, they've seen their political power grow within the party. He's increased his strength in polling that we've seen in the aftermath of these sort of decisions.
Yeah, I think I'll toss through to my next answer.
And essentially, this is what, this is something that they're expecting, and it's something politically they think that will help them.
Aaron, you spoke to some voters about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Let's take a listen, and then I want your analysis after we hear from them.
I do like Trump, but he needs to learn how to be quiet on a few things. I think some of his social issues, I do not like how they're attacking him. I just don't feel that's appropriate, the way that they've been going after him. But I just feel DeSantis is more of an Iowa boy, even though he's down in Florida. I just feel he has the sense of what we feel here in Iowa.
I voted for him in 2020. But I think Governor DeSantis, he has it a little more together. I'm not saying that Trump doesn't, but I think there's too much drama with him.
Aaron, your take?
That's right. That's right. Drama. That's kind of been the underlying reason that people are curious about DeSantis or supporting DeSantis throughout Trump's legal cases as those continue to build and develop is drama. It's kind of the legal cases surrounding Trump voters have that in the back of their mind, and they're conscious as a reason to not support Trump and maybe vote for someone like DeSantis or Nikki Haley. And usually we hear about the bump, right, that Trump gets after these indictments in the polls. But you're also seeing it's been a reason that's been cited for DeSantis supporters that I'm running into at events, and that's kind of showing it's giving them a clear reason to them to stick with a non-Trump candidate.
But Trump is still the front runner. Let's look at the latest Iowa poll from Fox Business. Let's pull that up on the screen here. You can see Trump's at 52% in this Fox Business poll in Iowa. Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, 18%. Nikki Haley, close to DeSantis, as Aaron was discussing, coming up the side at 16%. Vivek Ramaswamy, he's not making the latest debate stage for the upcoming CNN debate. Chris Christie, though, the former New Jersey governor, at 3%, hasn't played in Iowa nearly at all. Finn Gomez, when you look at that, yes, Christie's not a player in Iowa,
right.
Okay? No one's expected him to do well in Iowa. He hasn't been campaigning there in any significant way, if ever.
Right.
But he is a factor in New Hampshire. And all this talk about Nikki Haley maybe getting a little traction, maybe significant traction, it's complicated by Christie. How does Christie factor into New Hampshire?
In terms of Haley, it's a collision course. It's the same voter, essentially, that she's appealing to, that he's appealing to. She needs those 10 points, roughly, that he's getting to help her bid in New Hampshire. What is also interesting about that, and what people close to the Haley campaign have told me, is that if she does well enough in Iowa, if she comes in like a close third, at least, to DeSantis, that could be enough to knock him out. That can be enough to knock him out after Iowa. I know Aaron has reported that he could go past, that they're ready to go to Super Tuesday. But frankly, if he does poorly in Iowa...
But then Christie's still there in New Hampshire.
That could be the end for DeSantis in Iowa. And how far does Christie go after New Hampshire?
And if DeSantis got out, would he endorse Trump? Would he endorse Haley or nobody? We'll have to see. A lot to discuss. We just got back from break, and here we are, deep into politics. Finn Gomez and Aaron Navarro, thank you.
Days.
Next up, we turn to President Joe Biden and look at the challenges facing his reelection campaign. You're streaming America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's wrong with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
Why?
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh my God.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
You had a substitute teacher that was pretty popular. What was his reputation?
Everyone loved him.
You had to miss a test. What did he offer to have you make up the test?
He said that I can come by after school was all over and just take the exam. The blinds were down. He closed the door. The next thing I knew, he was right next to me. That's when I realized what was going to happen. Even if I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, no one would hear me because no one was there. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, he would kill me and he would kill my family. So I did it.
Pledge of Silence, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend
somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
Human remains found this week.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
A gripping true crime original, 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. A new USA Today Suffolk University poll reveals President Joe Biden is losing support from key groups who turned out for him in 2020. Here is White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre when asked about those numbers.
The president has always put equity at the center of every policy he's put forward. We get it. We get that it's going to take a little bit of time for folks to feel what the Bidenomics has been able to do.
CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now from the White House. Ed, great to have you here. What's your latest reporting, Ed, on how the Biden White House, especially the top advisors inside the building behind you, are approaching some of this talk inside the Democratic Party, inside political circles, about the perceived loss of support among some groups that were key backers of him in 2020?
A few things, Bob. First off, they continue to say it's still early. And I've asked now for the definition of early, and I'm told it's roughly April. So this continues to be a problem for them after April. Then I think they really begin to get much more worried. They see the numbers we're seeing. They understand even in their own internal numbers that things are perhaps softer than they would like to see. But they began outreach to these groups of voters last summer, which is a departure for most Democratic campaigns, something that they say is designed to help them win in November 2024. They're not concerned as much about winning right now or evidence that they're, doing gangbusters with those people at this stage. They're more worried about building to next fall. The other thing they keep in mind is we have a dynamic this year, and our own Anthony Salvanto in our polling unit has called this out, a dynamic this year where you have essentially two incumbents running against each other, right? One is the challenger to the sitting incumbent, but the other one has basically been around so long now and is running again for his old job that, in essence, you have two incumbents running against each other and some other options out there. One of the things that USA Today poll exposed, again, is, especially among younger voters, this intrigue and interest in third-party or other options beyond the Democrat and the Republican. There's a growing belief among Democratic pollsters, at least, that that's partly because younger voters who don't have much personal connection or affinity for either of these older frontrunners might at least want to explore at this stage the possibility of somebody else. So that's RFK Jr., that's Cornel West, Marianne Williamson, and Dean Phillips on the Democratic side. And we'll see if anyone else gets in. Joe Manchin, of course, is going to start making some trips to New Hampshire later this month. So That's part of what they're seeing. But otherwise, they work towards November 2024 and know they've got a lot of work to do in the meantime. And we're expected to hear in the coming days a little more about their plans for early in the year, especially as Republicans are sorting out who exactly their nominee will be.
Ed, I think back to that 2004 Democratic primary where some voters said they were going to date Dean and marry Kerry. They would flirt with voting for Howard Dean, but ultimately they would settle with John Kerry, the candidate they thought could be the best possible nominee for the Democratic Party. That was a primary race, of course. But is there an expectation, I'm hearing this from some Democrats, that there's frustration, it's going to be reflected in the polls, but ultimately Democratic voters will come home to President Biden, especially if former President Trump becomes the Republican nominee, and the stakes are seen as very high because he's not seen by many Democrats as a typical Republican. He's someone who some Democrats talk about as a threat, a dire threat to American democracy due to the insurrection on January 6th and his conduct in and around that day. What are Democrats doing to reassure themselves, if anything, that all of this consternation about border policy, about the president's age, the economy, will somehow fade away once the general election comes into focus?
Because they believe that while people may want to pick up on your reminder of what was said in 2004, date Dean Phillips maybe, or cuddle with Kennedy in the meantime, Sorry for that image, but you get the idea. That ultimately they're going to come
I take
home.
responsibility for even bringing up 2004. I teed it up for you, Ed.
But either way, the idea is that, yes, when they realize, if it is Trump as expected, that it's him on the Republican side and that your next best option is Joe Biden, that they'll come home. They point to the fact that even if it isn't Donald Trump now, they say, look, MAGA has poisoned, in essence, the entire Republican field. Look no further than what happened to Nikki Haley in New Hampshire, where she couldn't explain in a way that many would find appropriate these days what exactly the Civil War was fought over. That is something they'll use against her should she somehow make it to the general election round, either as the presidential or vice presidential candidate. Look at all the rhetoric that the former president continues to spew about the press or about Democrats or about career prosecutors and judges. All of that, they say, is a collective portfolio that will be used to prosecute the case against him. And while the economy may be on the rebound, and that will fade perhaps as at least, if not the dominant issue, there'll be other issues to talk about. The other one, yes, that they're likely to fall back on is what happened 3 years ago this Saturday, January 6th, and all of the erosion or attempts to erode democratic institutions in this country and the general just principle of truth. They believe, Democrats do, that that's still, when poll tested or when voters are reminded about it, ultimately brings people back into the Biden fold, even if they're not entirely jazzed about it.
Ed, quickly, is there any trepidation, even a little bit, about Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota doing better than expected in New Hampshire, where President Biden isn't on the ballot?
Not as of January 2nd, 2024, but we've got, 21 days until New Hampshire? We'll see. For now, no concern. And if there were, we'd be seeing evidence of the Biden-Harris campaign trying to do something more organized in New Hampshire. There is no evidence of that as of tonight. No plans I'm aware of for them to go, either to send the president, vice president, or to do more.
Well, I won't be seeing President Biden then at the Red Arrow Diner anytime soon. Ed O'Keefe, thank you for your reporting. Battle New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez facing a new allegation. Menendez accused of making positive comments about Qatar in exchange for items including luxury watches. He has pleaded not guilty to all prior charges brought against him. Next, we look at Congress's to-do list in the new year. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
a herd grows
We need to step up and help them.
and a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and come back, that's when our tribe will begin to heal.
Yellowstone Bison Revival, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She is a beloved American icon and head of a media empire. But is Oprah Winfrey happy? How do you define happiness?
Yeah, I call it happierness.
Find out when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That Desired Farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's a country music legend, philanthropist, fashion icon, and now rock star.
I think there's a lot to be said about being comfortable with who you are.
Find out what's next for Dolly Parton when we go person to person.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has a glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Congress, as ever, facing a series of looming deadlines. As this new year kicks off, the federal government faces two possible shutdowns in the coming months. Lawmakers have until midnight on January 19th to avoid a partial closure, and a total shutdown could come in early February. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us here at the table. So how does a shutdown get avoided, Nicole?
I mean, we'll see if that happens, Bob. Obviously, as you know, this is a unique situation in that there are not one but two funding deadlines. So that first deadline hits January 19th, the second February 2nd. And so the short answer is we don't exactly know what's going to happen because as far as some of these appropriations discussions are going, they don't even have a top line number. So without that, you can't really pass a fuller appropriations package. So that is kind of where the dilemma lies.
Where is Speaker Johnson?
Well, we know he'll be at the border Wednesday. Obviously, you know, in addition to government funding, we know that Congress is also trying to reach some type of compromise, at least in the Senate, with respect to a broader national security supplemental package. But in order to do that, congressional Republicans have made clear that there has to be some change in border policy to do so. So that is why Speaker Johnson will be at the border Wednesday dealing with that issue, which is another not hard deadline that's approaching, but certainly an issue that Congress is hoping to tackle soon since, as you know, Ukraine hasn't been funded in about a year. Of course, there's also funding for Israel at stake as well. So a lot of big decisions to make and not a lot of time to do it.
Do you think it all gets poured into one bill, or are these side deals that are cut?
You know, I think trying to put it all in one, even though some have suggested that that could be one potential option to try to get as much done as possible, I think could be challenging just because, as we know, it's a very prickly situation with respect to government funding. Many Republicans, of course, want to be more conservative and hew to a lower top line number than some Democrats, and particularly some in the Senate who want some additional funding added. And then, of course, this issue with the border. I mean, we have seen these negotiations drag on and on and on. In the Senate, granted, we're about a month in, but, you know, this is something that also is going to be very thorny in terms of how the policy is written. So I just see it as a very challenging situation if they just try to lump everything all together, which we know Congress doesn't always like doing that.
And on the congressional beat, there has been this ongoing investigation by House Republicans launched in recent weeks about what's happening inside universities and colleges with regard to anti-Semitism and university leadership. House Republicans have been very keen to go down that path, and there's been news on that front related. Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard University, has decided to step down. What's your latest reporting on her decision?
Yeah, this is very significant news because this is something that we had been watching following that hearing back in early December, where we saw the House Education Committee really try to take many of these university presidents to task, particularly over their responses to whether or not calls for genocide against the Jewish people violates their code of conduct. And we saw some of these university leaders with elusive answers, you know, to put it mildly. But that being said, consequently, we saw the resignation of University of Pennsylvania's president shortly after that hearing, and now Harvard University's president, whose board actually backed her just a couple of weeks ago. But now there has been this change where she submitted her resignation. She, in addition to, you know, her testimony in that hearing, was also facing plagiarism charges, which she has denied. But certainly in terms of talking to a student just today, said that this is something that, you know, some students are relieved about it, but others are wondering what's next. As far as congressional leaders, though, we know Chair Stefanik, who was a big part of that hearing, said that this was something in terms of President Gay that was long overdue. And still, we know that Congress is continuing their investigation into many of these universities and how they handle anti-Semitism on campus.
Has CBS learned anything more about why this happened today? This decision came out today from the Harvard president?
Well, as I mentioned, obviously there was the fallout from the hearing, but then these plagiarism allegations surfaced with respect to her dissertation at Harvard, also with some articles. She did make some corrections. And again, while she did deny some of those allegations, there was a lot of pressure building on her from outside forces, particularly a lot of big donors. We know, according to some reports, that there was a new plagiarism complaint filed just this week. So I don't know if it was a situation of the writing being on the wall, but she had been under pressure for some time, in addition to not just the hearing, but also her handling of how she responded to the initial war between Israel and Hamas and how she handled that on campus. So there were a lot of issues at play. She was only 6 months into the job, first Black female president of Harvard. So she will stay on board, but only in the capacity as a faculty member.
She might be stepping down from that position, but you could be still covering her testimony before that congressional committee House Republicans are launching in the coming months. We'll have to see. Nicole Killian, thank you.
You bet.
And that's it for us today at America Decides. You can watch us Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came